Easter weekend was supposed to be the kind of harmless holiday chaos that everyone secretly enjoys. Too much candy, a little family noise, that one dish nobody wants to admit tastes wrong, and kids sprinting across a lawn looking for eggs. That is what it was supposed to be. Instead, the weekend turned into something that felt less like a holiday and more like a season finale of a show that nobody fully understood but could not stop watching. International ultimatums, shifting diplomatic deadlines, hospitalization rumors, a White House Easter egg roll that somehow drifted into a foreign policy briefing, and late-night television hosts who came back from vacation to find that the chaos had not waited for them. It all happened at once, stacked on top of itself, and by the time Sunday evening arrived, people were trying to figure out where the Easter weekend ended and the political performance began. The honest answer is that the two things never separated. They ran together the entire time, and the confusion that produced was the story. Let's start with Iran, not because it was the most absurd element of the weekend, but because it was the one that kept resetting the tone. The messaging came in waves. One post carried the weight of an imminent decision. The next pulled back just enough to create uncertainty. Then another arrived with the energy of a finalized position, followed by a revision that quietly reopened everything the previous message had appeared to close. Analysts who had spent careers reading diplomatic signals were publicly struggling to determine whether they were watching the build-up to a military operation or the promotional campaign for one. Those two things, it turns out, look increasingly similar, and that similarity is not accidental. The specific language was extraordinary by any standard. "Open the strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah." This was posted publicly, attributed to the President of the United States in connection with an active international standoff. No policy framework attached, no strategic context provided, no explanation of what exactly would happen, when, or under what specific conditions. Just the sentence itself, sitting there in the feed next to whatever else was trending that day. Kimmel described the experience of receiving this kind of communication while sitting at a holiday table. He asked the audience to construct the scene in their minds. You are finishing Easter brunch. The kids are outside looking for jelly beans. Your 79-year-old grandfather stands up from the table, looks at no one in particular, and announces at full volume, "Open the strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah." The audience understood immediately what the punchline was going to be before he delivered it. You put him in the car. The whole family is crying on the way to the emergency room. Nobody debates it. Nobody waits for clarification. The behavior itself is the answer to every question. What made the Iran situation particularly disorienting was not the threat itself, but the rhythm of its delivery. There was a deadline, 5 o'clock Eastern, the Strait of Hormuz would be opened, or consequences would follow. Then 8 o'clock Eastern, then midnight. Then the question of whether midnight meant American midnight or Iranian midnight, which Kimmel noted with complete accuracy, could theoretically trigger a world war over a time zone miscalculation. He described Trump as the only president in history who teases a bombing the same way a broadcast network promotes a new episode of a procedural drama. Everything carries the language of a reveal. Nothing carries the weight of a finalized decision. The tension is the product. The resolution is perpetually 2 weeks away. And on the subject of 2 weeks, Kimmel assembled the archive. Healthcare plan, 2 weeks. Paris Accord decision, 2 weeks. Gold card rollout, 2 weeks. Major announcement, 2 weeks. The pattern was not new, and it was not subtle, but hearing it assembled in sequence, each promise tagged with its date and its outcome, produced the particular humor that comes from recognition, the moment when something you have individually noticed gets confirmed as a system rather than an accident. He called Trump a conscientious employee who always gives 2 weeks' notice but never actually starts the new job. The room understood the joke on at least 3 levels simultaneously, but the gold card deserved its own attention, and it got it. The Trump Gold Card, officially the Get Into America Express card, was presented as an immigration reform initiative. For $1 million, a foreign national could purchase legal visitor status, a pathway to citizenship, and a presidential pardon for one major crime of the purchaser's selection. That third item is the one that requires a moment, not visitor status, not a pathway to citizenship, a pardon for a major crime, chosen by the person buying the card, included in the price, available to any foreign national with sufficient funds. Kimmel's assessment of the theology involved was precise and deserves full quotation. He noted Trump's argument that wealthy immigrants are definitionally the best immigrants, that the $1 million price tag functions as a quality filter, and that the people who can afford the card are self-evidently the kind of people America should want. Kimmel identified the biblical passage Trump had apparently misread. "That's right," he said. "The best people are the rich people. It's what Jesus always said. It's in the Bible. He says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle if you pay the needle $1 million. The audience processed this for a half second and then came apart. The line worked because it was accurate. It was a completely faithful summary of the policy's underlying logic, dressed in the language of the tradition Trump most frequently invokes to justify the exact opposite of what that tradition teaches. Then there was the fertilizer. The Strait of Hormuz standoff had produced a practical agricultural consequence that, under different circumstances, might have been its own major story. The blockade had cut off imports of nitrogen, a key component of fertilizer, and American farmers who needed it to grow the crops that feed the country were facing significant shortages and sharply rising costs. Trump's response to this situation was delivered in the format of a video message addressed to his supporters. "Hello everyone, this is your favorite president, Donald J. Trump. Recently, I started a war in Iran. It's not a war, but it is a war, and for reasons I don't care to understand, we are out of fertilizer." Kimmel let this play. He did not add a joke immediately. The statement had covered the material. Meanwhile, over at The Late Show, Colbert had been cataloging a different set of developments. The Attorney General situation was one of them. Pam Bondi had been fired. The stated reason, per reporting that Colbert summarized for the audience, was that she had not done enough illegal things on the president's behalf. This was offered as an explanation for the termination of the nation's chief law enforcement officer, the head of the Department of Justice, dismissed for insufficient lawbreaking on behalf of the administration she served. Colbert noted that this particular personnel move had not generated the volume of coverage it might have received in a less saturated news environment because his boss baby had been filling his diaper in what Colbert described as the bigliest way, probably ever. J.D. Vance had also contributed to the week's content by sharing his views on alien sightings, which he had identified as demons living among the population. This revelation passed with minimal public discussion because the Iran deadline posts arrived around the same time and the audience has finite attention. The Kennedy Center naming had been addressed earlier in the week by Colbert, but it belonged in any comprehensive account of the period. The official new name was the Donald J. Trump and John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. Kennedy was assassinated. The memorial bearing his name was built to honor a man who was murdered in office. Trump's name was placed on that memorial by a board he had personally selected during a presidency he was currently occupying. Colbert's response was to observe that the problem with putting your name on a memorial is that memorials are for dead people, and then to add, with the particular pause of someone timing a line he has been waiting to deliver, or so his doctors claim. The five-word addition converted the observation from a political point into something more interesting, a quiet suggestion that the question of whether Donald Trump is actually alive was a matter on which his medical team would need to provide definitive clarification, since independent verification was unavailable. Then came the hospitalization rumor. Trump had not appeared publicly from Wednesday through Sunday, which by his standards represented an unusual absence. The gap was enough to generate speculation that moved at the speed at which speculation always moves online, which is to say, faster than any correction can follow. The White House issued a response. The response described the people asking questions as deranged liberals cooking up insane conspiracy theories because the president had gone 12 hours without speaking to the press. Kimmel noted that the problem with using 12 hours as a benchmark was that Trump, under normal operating conditions, goes approximately 12 minutes without speaking to press. The specific metric chosen to dismiss the concern was itself evidence for the concern. He added, with the careful language of someone trying to be accurate, Trump was not hospitalized this weekend, even though he definitely should have been. The audience heard the distinction between the two sentences clearly. The Easter egg roll had offered its own contributions. The tradition dates to 1878. Rutherford B. Hayes originated it. In the years since, it has been a ceremonial occasion of sufficient gentleness that its most controversial moments have historically involved weather conditions and egg supply. This year it was different. The Easter egg roll became an extension of the surrounding atmosphere, with remarks that felt less suited to a children's celebration and more suited to a setting where someone might reasonably be handing out briefing documents. Kimmel observed that the line between ceremonial function and political stage had effectively dissolved, and that the Easter Bunny had apparently been replaced by someone who wandered into a policy meeting by accident and simply never left. The mail-in voting situation added a layer that was specifically its own kind of complicated. Trump had voted by mail in a special election in Palm Beach, a district he won by double digits in the previous cycle, a district he currently lives in. The candidate he endorsed, described publicly as someone who would never let the voters down, lost the race and returned to his previous career as a financial planner. The broader legislation Trump was simultaneously pushing through Congress would eliminate mail-in voting nationally. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was asked to explain the apparent inconsistency between the president's voting method and the president's legislative agenda. Kimmel described Johnson as being in a bit of a pickle. The phrase was not inaccurate. What Kimmel kept returning to, across all of these separate threads and in the specific words that carried the most weight over the course of the broadcast, was not the absurdity of any individual moment. It was the larger pattern, the way serious international situations get delivered in cliffhanger installments. The way questions about leadership get answered with the pacing of promotional campaigns. The way a holiday built around candy and children's traditions becomes indistinguishable from the political theater surrounding it. The way the audience reflexively checks for updates because every development is structured to feel incomplete, to feel like a teaser rather than a resolution, to feel like the next post will be the one that finally explains what is actually happening. He said it plainly, and it was the line that stayed after everything else had moved on. This is how it goes every single time. Trump says something insane. We all freak out. Then he backs off. He says, actually, I'll do it in 2 weeks. Then we relax. Then he forgets he ever said it. He has the memory and the skin color of a goldfish. And maybe the worst part, Kimmel added, is not the behavior itself. It is how relaxed the congressional Republicans have become about it. How smoothly the extraordinary has been reclassified as ordinary. How completely the threshold for alarm has shifted so that an Easter weekend featuring international military deadlines, agricultural shortages caused by a war the president described as not a war, but also a war, a hospitalization rumor, a Strait of Hormuz ultimatum, and a Kennedy Memorial renaming reads as simply another weekend. Not a crisis, not a moment requiring institutional response, just another stretch of days in which the behavior that would have ended any previous presidency arrives in the feed between the candy promotions and the egg hunt photos, processed and scrolled past, and mostly absorbed without the kind of sustained attention that would be required to actually reckon with it. That sustained attention is what comedy provides, imperfectly and from an angle, but consistently. Kimmel and Colbert do not have subpoena power. They do not write legislation. They cannot compel testimony or override executive orders or slow the machinery they are describing. What they can do is stand in front of an audience and say, clearly and with timing precise enough to keep the room from looking away, that what is happening is not normal, that a president celebrating job losses is the opposite of what a leader is supposed to be, that a man who votes by mail while banning mail-in voting is doing something that has a name, that an immigration program selling pardons for major crimes is not a policy, that a war that is not a war but also is a war, which has produced a fertilizer shortage that the president does not care to understand, deserves more than a shrug and a 2-week notice. The holiday ended. The headlines moved, as they always do now, with the speed of a feed that cannot slow down, because slowing down would mean giving any single moment the kind of attention that might produce an actual response. The Strait remained what it was. The fertilizer prices remained what they were. The gold card remained available at its posted price, pardon included. Easter weekend set a record for how much unpredictability could be compressed into a single narrative without any of it resolving. The record stood for exactly 1 week before the next one arrived to challenge it. And somewhere in Palm Beach, a financial planner was back at his desk, returning calls, wondering what happened.